Good evening and welcome to Undaunted, bringing into the news untold stories. I am Star Smart. Let's begin. Well, since the illegal annexation of southern Cameroon's Ambazonia in 1961, the Amazonian people have endured relentless oppression, systemic exploitation, and a calculated campaign to erase their identity and sovereignty. What began as a peaceful call for self-determination has been met with a brutal response from La République du Cameroon, sparking an unrelenting struggle for liberation. Yet, in the face of overwhelming adversity, betrayal, and internal challenges, the Amazonian people have demonstrated extraordinary resilience and an unwavering commitment to the restoration of their homeland. The Amazonian struggle is not merely a fight for political independence, it is a battle to reclaim a stolen heritage and a stolen sovereignty, rebuild a fractured identity, and restore the dignity of a people who have long been marginalized. The war declared by the Biya regime in 2016 has led to widespread atrocities, including massacres, enforced disappearances, and the razing of entire villages, over 500 to add to that. Innocent civilians have borne the brunt of this war, with thousands killed, others subjugated, millions displaced, and countless others subjugated to unimaginable suffering. Yet amidst this tragedy, the people of Ambazonia continue to stand firm, refusing to let their culture, history, and aspirations to be erased. Betrayal has been a painful reality in this journey. Pseudo-liberation fighters, such as the so-called Amazonian Defense Forces, the ADF, have tarnished the struggle's authenticity by prioritizing personal gain over collective freedom. These groups, often accused of collaborating with the colonial regime, have sown distrust and chaos within the resistance movement, undermining the genuine efforts of the Amazonian State Army and its patriotic leadership led under Dr. Sacco. Well, this internal sabotage, coupled with the colonial regime's relentless propaganda, has presented an additional layer of complexity to an already difficult battle. Despite these challenges, the spirit of Ambazonia remains unbroken. Communities continue to resist colonial oppression through grassroots mobilization, cultural preservation, and unwavering support for the liberation efforts. Amazonian fighters entrenched in the bush have adapted to asymmetric warfare, striking back at the regime's terrorizing forces while upholding the principles of their just cause. The civilian population, though battered by war, has shown remarkable solidarity, offering resources, shelter, and moral support to those on the front lines. The Amazonian diaspora has also played a critical role, raising awareness, lobbying for international support, and keeping the plight of the homeland in global conversations. Their efforts have ensured that the struggle for Ambazonia's freedom is not confined to the battlegrounds of Africa, but resonates across the halls of global institutions and advocacy groups. As the Amazonian people press forward, they do so with an unyielding vision to march to Buea, the historic capital of the southern Cameroon's Ambazonia, as a free and sovereign nation. This vision is fueled by the memory of their ancestors who fought for self-determination, the sacrifices of those who have fallen in the struggle, and the enduring hope for a future where the Amazonian flag flies high, untainted by colonial oppression. The journey to Buea is fraught with trials, but the Amazonian people have shown that they are prepared to endure whatever. Their resilience has been a testament to the indomitable human spirit and the power of collective will. As Ambazonia stands on the cusp of history, it calls on the global community to recognize its legitimate aspirations and support its fight for liberation. For the Amazonian people, the path to freedom may be steep. They march forward united in their struggle, determined to reach Boya and restore their sovereignty. Well, with this, we'll head on to the prime headlines. Well, these are the prime headlines on Undaunted tonight. We see the colonial interference threatening the sacred traditions of Ambazonia, as well as the United Nations reports condemning the human rights violations in Ambazonia under La Republique's colonial regime. We also see 5 ADF fighters killed in Alabukam, including General Whippon and Commander Mami. We see the Catholic Church in Ntasen razed by fire, yet another serial report of fire accidents in Bamenda, in Ambazonia in its entirety. Well, on the foreign scene, we see in Africa Libya's migrant crisis, a humanitarian perspective. We'll take a look at that. And on the foreign scene, Ohio congressman vying to replace J.D. Vance in the Senate says Trump's agenda must be priority on day one. Let's head into the full briefings of Undaunted tonight. You're welcome back. We start with the Catholic Church in Ntasen. Located in Bamenda, it has become the latest victim of the ongoing neglect and instability plaguing Ambazonia. On Sunday, as the congregation celebrated the Feast of Christ the King, a devastating fire broke out, leaving the cherished church building in ruins. This tragic incident underscores the dire realities faced by Ambazonians who continue to bear the brunt of systemic neglect and the absence of essential services under colonial occupation. The good thing, though, is nobody lost their lives in this tragic incident. The Catholic Church in Ntasen, Bamenda, and Quain has been reduced to ashes after a devastating fire broke out on Sunday. The inferno struck while the congregation was away celebrating the Feast of Christ the King, leaving the community in shock and mourning the loss of their cherished place of worship. While the exact cause of the fire remains unknown, it highlights the chronic neglect of Ambazonia by the occupying colonial regime. This neglect is glaringly evident in the absence of fire service units or emergency response systems across the territory of Ambazonia. Once again, it was the swift intervention of Ambazonian civilians that prevented further destruction. Thankfully, no lives were lost. But the burden of firefighting continues to rest entirely on the shoulders of ordinary civilians. This is not the first time the people of Ambazonia have been forced to fend for themselves in the face of serial fire disasters. From homes to community structures, fire outbreaks have become a recurring nightmare in Ambazonia. Yet, no preventive measures or response mechanisms have been established by the authorities. Speculations have grown that many of these fires may not be mere accidents, but deliberate acts of arson, part of a broader strategy of oppression against the Ambazonian people by forces of occupation. Some Ambazonians also believe that these incidents could be the work of opportunistic individuals exploiting the chaos of war to target vulnerable communities. Whatever the cause, the systematic failure to address these disasters only underscores the broader disregard for the safety and welfare of the Ambazonian population. This tragic incident at Ntasen is yet another reminder of the pressing need for self-determination and self-governance in Ambazonia. Only a free and independent Ambazonia can ensure the establishment of critical emergency services, infrastructures, and accountability to protect its people and heritage from such tragedies. While still in Ambazonia, we see unresolved chieftaincy issues with colonial interference as well. La Republic might not be at all concerned about Ambazonia's infrastructure or emergency services that could save Ambazonian lives. But the case is quite different with the Ambazonians' tradition. Since the systemic annexation of southern Cameroon in 1961, the colonial regime of La République du Cameroun has employed a deliberate strategy to undermine the heritage and identity of the Ambazonian people. This campaign has ranged from imposing foreign administrative structures to infiltrating and disrupting cultural practices. Once a vibrant and self-sustaining cultural entity, Ambazonia now faces a calculated erosion of its traditions. This is evident in the ongoing chieftaincy crisis in Ndzah village, where colonial interference continues to thwart the will of the people and undermine the sanctity of Ambazonian traditions. Well, the throne of Ndzah village, situated in Bamenda in Mazam County of the Federal Republic of Ambazonia, has remained vacant and contested since 2019, following the passing of Fon Victor Akotom II on October 30th, 2019. The kingmakers, adhering strictly to Ambazonian traditions, enthroned Fon Marius Mbochom Akotom III in November of that year. However, the colonial administration refused to recognize Marius, disrupting his public presentations and sealing the palace. For 4 years, the throne has remained in limbo, with successive colonial administrators failing to resolve the crisis. In a controversial move on November 21, 2024, Austin Ayuni Saka, the colonial divisional officer for Bamenda, unilaterally presented a certain Fobolingong Nson as the new traditional ruler of Ndzah. This announcement was met with outright rejection by the kingmakers and the entire population, who viewed the imposition as a blatant disregard for their customs. The kingmakers have consistently rejected the involvement of colonial authorities in the sacred process of selecting a fon. According to Ungu Williams, a representative of the kingmakers, he says the name presented to us as the new fon surprises us, especially since we haven't gone anywhere and don't even know him. We oppose this decision and demand that the administration unseal our palace. Well, in an open letter to the colonial DO, the kingmakers expressed their dismay, stating that the unilateral decision disregarded the objections of the community and threatened the unity and peace of Ndzah. They reiterated that the process of selecting a fon is a sacred and spiritual act vested solely on the kingmakers, guided by ancestral wisdom and traditions. The letter reads in part, any attempt to impose an unendorsed candidate not only disregards our traditions, but also jeopardizes the unity and peace of our community. Such actions risk undermining trust between the administration and the people of Ndzah. Now, despite these objections, the colonial DO has called on the population to accept and work with the imposed candidate, Fobolong Nson. Well, however, the widespread rejection of this decision indicates that the chieftaincy crisis is far from resolving anytime soon. The crisis in Ndzah village is emblematic of the broader struggle of cultural preservation in the entire Ambazonia. The imposition of foreign authorities on sacred traditions highlights the colonial regime's disregard for the identity and autonomy of the Ambazonian people. This interference is not merely administrative, it is an attack on the cultural foundations of Ambazonian society. The people of Ndzah, like many across Ambazonia, remain resolute in their defiance of colonial manipulation Their unwavering stance demonstrates the unyielding spirit of a people who are determined to safeguard their traditions and resist external impositions. Until Amazonians are given the autonomy to manage their own cultural and political affairs, such crises sadly might continue to fuel the larger struggle for independence and self-determination. A lot still happening in Ambazonia. We see from Ndzah County Situation Report. We know the ongoing liberation struggle in Ambazonia faces not only the brutality of La Republic du Cameroon forces, but also the disruptive activities of pseudo-liberation groups like the Amazonian Defense Forces. These groups, which claim allegiance to the Amazonian cause, have sown confusion and distrust among the suffering population. Their actions, ranging from alleged kidnappings to ostentatious displays of wealth, it has tarnished the genuine efforts of liberation fighters committed to the cause. The recent events in Ndzah County further highlights the dangerous intersection of opportunism, betrayal, and the ongoing war. On November 25, 2024, colonial forces in Ndzah County ambushed and killed 5 ADF members, including their prominent leaders, the General Weapon and Commander Mami. Both were reportedly traveling in a Prado SUV. And famous for being involved in various kidnapping and theft incidents, 3 additional ADF fighters who had reportedly come to mourn their fallen leaders were also ambushed and killed during the same operation. While the images of the aftermath are too graphic for public dissemination, pictures of the luxurious Prado SUV provides a stark contrast to the realities faced by genuine Amazonian fighters. The use of such vehicles, along with reports of ADF members living in high apartment buildings, has raised serious questions about their commitment to the actual struggle. Unlike other guerrilla forces like the Amazonian State Army, who remain blended with the population and endure the hardship living in the bushes, the ADF conspicuous displays of wealth suggest a focus on personal enrichment rather than liberation, and also supports the allegations that they are part of the kidnappings and ransom. While this behavior has alienated them from the people that they claim to represent and has positioned them as self-serving actors within the broader conflict, taking advantage of the Amazonian War of Liberation. But there is growing speculation that these pseudo-liberation fighters have been working in close coordination with the colonial regime to undermine Ambazonia's genuine struggle. And we've seen this in them escorting CPDM members, loyalists to the colonial regime. Observers have also suggested that when La Republic forces face significant setbacks, as they did recently with the loss of 8 soldiers in Bouyi, they retaliate by targeting anyone, including their alleged collaborators, like the ADF. This is not only serving to boost the morale of La Republic forces, but it also creates a narrative for the international community that paints the regime as successfully combating insurgents or separatists, as they call them, and rather have the international community believe. For Ambazonians, this incident underscores the peril of betrayal and collaboration with the enemy. Those who compromise their people's cause for personal gain find themselves distrusted by both the colonial regime and the Amazonian population. The fate of the ADF leaders serve as a grim reminder of the cost of prioritizing selfish interest over collective liberation. The event in Ndzah County illustrates the multifaceted challenges faced by Ambazonians in their fight for freedom. Beyond resisting the colonial regime, the struggle requires vigilance against internal actors who exploit the cause for personal benefit. True liberation can only be achieved through unity, integrity, and unwavering dedication to the Amazonian people. The betrayal witnessed in the actions of pseudo-liberation groups like the ADF is a cautionary tale that resonates across the nation. A people who betray their own cannot find trust amongst their enemies or respect from their own. As Ambazonia continues to weather the storm of occupation and betrayal, its people remain resilient, committed to reclaiming their sovereignty and preserving the authenticity of their liberation struggle. Well, on November 22nd, we saw the United Nations Committee Against Torture releasing a damning report spotlighting egregious human rights violations in the Cameroons and in Namibia. The findings underscore the systemic abuses orchestrated by La Republique's colonial regime, particularly against the peoples of Ambazonia, whose resilience and quest for independence have been met with brutality and repression. The United Nations Committee expressed grave concerns over the ongoing violent crackdown by Paul Biya's regime on freedom fighters advocating for Ambazonian sovereignty. Since 2016, the colonial administration has waged an unrelenting war against the people of Ambazonia, resulting in widespread reports of intimidation, arbitrary arrest, and the indiscriminate use of force, including lethal force. The Amazonian Defense Force, as well as other groups, have borne the brunt of this aggression, though their role in the struggle has always been controversial, siding with the colonial regime. Ambazonian civilians, journalists, and human rights defenders have become prime targets of the regime's terror campaigns. The report highlights chilling incidents of torture and forced disappearances and extrajudicial killings, particularly disturbing are accounts of incommunicado detention, sexual violence, and degrading treatments, all inflicted under the guise of counter-insurgency operations. The Ambazonian liberation struggle has been a beacon of hope for the people. Despite the colonial government's attempt to crush their resolve, the Ambazonian population has faced a humanitarian crisis of unprecedented scale, with thousands displaced, millions displaced, villages razed, thousands dead, and lives irreparably damaged. These atrocities have not deterred the determination of Ambazonia to reclaim her sovereignty from a regime that prioritizes its imperialist agenda over the fundamental rights of the Ambazonian people. While the United Nations Committee has unequivocally called on La Republique to take immediate steps to halt human rights abuses, investigate violations, prosecute perpetrators, and compensate victims and their families. However, the colonial regime continues to ignore these recommendations, dismissing accusations as baseless and shielding its oppressive practices from accountability. And by now, I'm sure you know why. While the report also addresses pre-trial detention conditions in Namibia, the focus remains squarely on the dire situation in Ambazonia for Ambazonians. That is their focus. The atrocities inflicted by the colonial regime demand not just condemnation, but concrete action. The international community has to recognize the Ambazonian struggle as a legitimate fight for self-determination, as all the global legal figures have stated, and hold La Republique accountable for its crimes against humanity. The Amazonian people remain unwavering in their quest for freedom, as United Nations findings demonstrate the oppressive tactics of the Biya regime. It has only strengthened the Ambazonia resolve to reclaim its sovereignty. It is imperative that the world does not turn a blind eye to the plight of Ambazonia, a nation fighting for its rights to exist, govern itself, and protect its heritage from obliteration. Well, with that, we head on to the news around Africa. On the African scene, we see that in a disturbing development, over 300 migrants were detained in Libya's desert by the 444 Brigade, a powerful militia operating under the Libyan army. The group announced its action on Monday, condemning smuggling and human trafficking while vowing to continue blocking migration routes. Images released by the militia showed armed militants overseeing rows of detained migrants, though their nationalities remain unclear. Libya has long been a focal point for migrants fleeing war, poverty, and instability in the Middle East and Africa, with many risking perilous journeys across deserts and the Mediterranean Sea in pursuit of safety in Europe. According to UNHCR, roughly 38,000 migrants have arrived in Italy and Malta from Libya this year. highlighting the scale of the crisis. However, these dangerous crossings frequently end in tragedy as overcrowded boats capsize, claiming countless lives. While the chaotic political situation in Libya exacerbates the plight of migrants. Since the fall of Muammar Gaddafi in 2011, the country has been mired in conflict between rival governments, creating a power vacuum that traffickers often exploit. Reports from the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights reveal that migrants in Libya are subjected to torture, forced labor, and starvation while detained. Efforts to curb migration often prioritize containment over addressing root causes, with European nations funding North African governments to stop migrants before they reach the sea. However, Libya's internal strife complicates these partnerships. Arrests like those conducted by the 444 Brigade underscores the urgent need for international intervention to protect human rights while they're at it, provide safer alternatives for migration, and address the systemic inequalities driving these perilous journeys. Well, on to Kenya, we see that in Kenya, a peaceful march in Nairobi commemorating the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women was rather met with tear gas on Monday as Kenya police forcibly dispersed protesters. The march aimed to highlight rising femicide cases and call for accountability, but the response from security forces drew sharp criticism from activists and residents alike. Nairobi resident Waitira Karanja expressed outrage, accusing the police of perpetuating violence against women rather than protecting them. According to her, the police are the ones who kill women, she said. They don't want us to protest against the killing of women. Kenya police agencies have reported 97 femicide cases in the past 3 months, but activists argue the actual numbers are much higher due to underreporting. Despite condemning femicide, President William Ruto has faced criticism for insufficient action. Social justice activist Happy Ola urged the government to focus on arrest and accountability, questioning the tangible outcomes of Ruto's promises. Globally, the United Nations reported that 85,000 women and girls were killed intentionally in 2023, with 60% of these deaths occurring at the hands of partners or close relatives. Africa bore the heaviest burden, 21,700 victims, highlighting an urgent need for systemic change. The violent dispersal of the peaceful march contradicts the spirit of the 16th day of activism against gender-based violence, underscoring the need for Kenyan authorities to address structural violence and foster a culture of accountability and protection for women. A lot of human rights cases on the African scene. We go to Mozambique and see children who have been killed amid post-election protests. Mozambique's security forces have killed at least 10 children and injured dozens of others while suppressing protests following a contested presidential election. Human Rights Watch reported on Monday hundreds of minors have also been detained, often for extended periods, in clear violation of international law. The protest erupted after the ruling party's candidate, Daniel Chapo, was declared the winner of the October 9th election amid widespread allegations of fraud and criticism from international observers. The unrest intensified after the killing of 2 opposition figures in a suspected political assassination. This fueled public anger and led to violent clashes between protesters and security forces. And right now, at least 30 people have been killed by live ammunition during protests, with local groups estimating the toll to be closer to 50. Over 2,700 people, many of them teenagers, have become detained during the demonstrations, according to the Mozambique Bar Association. Meanwhile, schools and businesses remain closed as the army has been deployed to enforce order. Furthermore, Mozambique's ruling party, since independence in 1975, has faced repeated accusations of election rigging. The current protest represents the most significant challenge to its 5-decade rule. Independent presidential candidate Venancio Mondlane, a vocal critic of the election outcome, has fled the country after receiving threats to his life. The violence against children and other civilians underscores the grave human rights violations taking place in Mozambique. Security forces must be held accountable for their actions, and the international community as well has to push for an independent investigation into the killings and detentions. The voices of Mozambique's citizens, especially its youths, deserve to be heard without fear of retribution as they demand justice and democratic reform. Oh, well, let's head on to the global scene. Oh, well, Representative Mike Carey, a Republican from Ohio, is throwing his hat into the ring to replace Vice President-elect J.D. Vance in the United States Senate. Carey, a veteran and former coal lobbyist, has won Ohio's 15th congressional district 3 times since 2021. He's touting his experience working with President-elect Trump in the private sector as a major asset. Carey's argument is that whoever replaces Vance will need to hit the ground running on day one. To help implement the new administration's agenda, he's emphasizing the importance of being ready to go from the start. Vance, by the way, still hasn't formally resigned from his Senate seat. As a congressman, Carey has been a strong advocate for American energy independence and has worked to protect coal miners' pensions benefit. He's also been endorsed by former President Donald Trump, which could give him a boost in his bid to replace Vance. While Musk has called for U.S. to replace fighter jets with drones, billionaire entrepreneur Elon Musk has sparked controversy with his recent comments on modern fighter jets. In a post on his social media platform, Musk declared that manned fighter jets are obsolete in the age of drones, suggesting that they will only serve to put pilots' lives at risk. Musk's comments come as he prepares to take on a new role, tasked by the United States President-elect Donald Trump to identify areas where the federal government can cut spending. As the head of SpaceX, Tesla, and Musk has built a reputation for his innovative approach to technology and his willingness to challenge conventional thinking. Musk's assertion that drones are the future of air combat is not entirely new. The use of unmanned aerial vehicles, the UAVs, have been increasing in recent years, with many militaries around the world investing heavily in drone technology. However, Musk's comments are significant, given his influence and expertise in the field of technology and innovation. It will be interesting to see how Musk's comments are received by the military and defense communities, as well as by the general public, as the United States military continues to evolve and adapt to new technologies. It is likely that the role of drones in air combat will continue to grow. Well, under the EU, the European Union and China are still in talks to resolve the issue of tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, the EVs, but a deal is not imminent, according to EU officials. The two sides are discussing alternatives to the tariffs, including setting a minimum price for Chinese EVs sold in Europe. This move aims to address the EU's concerns that Chinese state subsidies have artificially lowered the prices of these vehicles. Bernd Lang, chairman of the European Parliament Trade Committee, had previously suggested that an agreement was close, but EU officials have since denied this, citing ongoing stumbling blocks in the negotiation. The EU's approach to tariffs on Chinese EVs have been a topic of debate, with some member states supporting the tariffs and others opposing them. The issue only highlights the complexities of the EU's trade relations with China and the challenges of reaching a consensus among member states. Well, with that, we've come to the end of Undaunted tonight. But before we go, let's take a look at the recap. Undaunted tonight, we brought to you the colonial interference threatening sacred traditions in Ambazonia. On the national report still, we brought to you 5 ADF fighters killed in Alapocab, including General Weapon and Commander Miami, as well as the United Nations human rights reports on Ambazonia and the Catholic Church in Ntasen razed by fire. And on the African scene, we see Libya migrant crisis, the humanitarian perspective of it. And on the global scene, Ohio congressman vying to replace J.D. Vance in the Senate says Trump's agenda must be priority on day one. And that was it on tonight's Undaunted, bringing into the news untold stories. On behalf of the entire Undaunted team, we say thank you for tuning in. Good night and God bless you.